Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio, and this is Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C., inviting you to keep up with all of the material that we discuss here with much more depth and detail at tarpley.net, which is your source for an understanding of the crisis unfolding around us. And that is, of course, the second wave of the world economic depression. We are beyond the business cycle. We are in a disintegration of what remains of the world's financial system, an economic breakdown crisis. It's a disintegration, not just a collapse, and it's not a boom and bust or business cycle event. It is the catastrophic end, the abortive climax of a whole era of finance oligarchical rule. Now, let's go in medias res. The interesting news of this week, in the midst of a general pattern of breakdown, is the first really significant move by a major nation to fight against what is called financial globalization. In other words, for the past 30 to 40 years, we've increasingly been under the rule of a casino economy based on speculation, hot money, hedge funds, zombie banks, and above all their tools, derivatives, and the $1.5 quadrillion derivatives bubble. So a world economy that's been completely financialized with declining or stagnating rates of real economic production in terms of basic commodities, steel, chemical, rubber, and all the rest, as well as a general decay of infrastructure. So that has been made possible by this predominance of the financier interest, the bank, hedge fund, derivative, speculation, bubble economy interest. This is now the first time that anybody has taken a reasonably high-profile step to strike back against this. Is the German government on Tuesday afternoon of this past week, and that means we're recording today on the 21st of May. So today's Friday, the 21st of May. I'm referring to the events of the previous Tuesday. The German government, and this means Angela Merkel and Schäuble, the Minister of Finance of Germany, along with a guy called Jochen Sanyo, who is the head of BaFin, B-A-F-I-N, which is I guess it's the German equivalent of the Securities and Exchange Commission. You can call it the financial watchdog. They issued an executive order, an emergency order, that because of excessive speculation, meaning speculative attacks on euro bonds and the euro by implication, that they were going to outlaw, to ban for 1 year all naked credit default swaps. Naked credit default swaps. And they did this at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon Eastern time here, and they said it was going to go into effect at midnight Central European time. So it meant that within about 3 to 4 hours, Germany had banned the selling, the dealing in naked credit default swaps, as well as naked shorts on a list of German banks, insurance companies, and reinsurance companies, a couple of the large reinsurance companies that are located in Germany, notably the Munich one, which is one of the biggest. So this was one of the first breaks. Really, to find anything comparable, you've got to go back to somebody like Mahathir Mohamad in Malaysia in the midst of the Asian contagion, really a dollar breakdown crisis then as now, when Mahathir Mohamad instituted capital controls, exchange controls for Malaysia in 1998 and helped himself to get out of the crisis. That was a definite counterstroke against the forces of globalization, which of course means looting, pillaging, piracy, super exploitation, and so forth. So here's the German government coming out with this extremely interesting measure. Now, what it means, of course, is this. Credit default swaps, as we have been speaking about for many months, are derivatives. They are one of the most toxic types of derivatives. A credit default swap is essentially a bet, a wager, which says that you can be 1,000 miles away from a bond, and you can buy a credit default swap on that bond and say, I'm going to bet that bond goes bankrupt. So you don't own the bond. You have no relation to the bond. The bond is owned by somebody else. But you can bet on it with a credit default swap. Now, they claim it's insurance. Well, of course, if it is insurance, as they claim, then it's illegal anyway, because the people selling it are not insurance companies. They're not registered as insurance companies. They haven't met the legal requirements of being an insurance company. They don't have the capital reserves that an insurance company would be required by law to have. A lot of the people selling these credit default swaps have absolutely no capital reserves whatsoever. And we know the effect of credit default swaps. The two recent scandals that we've seen that prove this, AIG and Goldman. Remember, it's credit default swaps. These were sold by the hedge fund, which AIG Insurance Company set up in London, which sold $3 trillion of derivatives, more than the gross domestic product of France. But the credit default swap part was the most explosive component. And it's thanks to those wonderful, creative credit default swaps that the U.S. taxpayer, John Q. Public, you are stuck with a bill of 180 billion smackaroonies and counting. The other one, of course, Goldman Sachs. It was not so obvious in the hearings because they didn't bring it out, but when Goldman Sachs was selling toxic synthetic CDOs, collateralized debt obligations, another type of poisonous derivative, the Goldman Sachs people were betting against their own CDO, and other people were betting, Paulson and company were betting against their own CDO, using what? Using credit default swaps. Now, this was not brought out so much in the hearings, but the two most recent scandals, the AIG and the Goldman Sachs scandals, both of which play an important part in destroying the world financial system starting in 2008, more or less, although the buildup had been going on for years, that you see the credit default swaps play an absolutely central role in this. The benefit of credit default swaps is that you can go into a market that's fairly lightly traded, such as Greek government bonds, Portuguese government bonds, and you can use credit default swaps to create panic without having to own any of those bonds. You don't have to go into the market. You don't have to buy those bonds. Those bonds remain wherever they are. You can speculate against them at a distance, and with just a few $1 million of credit default swaps, you get a tremendous bang for the buck in terms of generating panic and setting up the crisis. And that indeed, of course, as we've documented over the weeks, has been the way that hedge funds have attacked Greece, Portugal, Spain, Italy, the Euro, Ireland, and others, as well as California, as we've seen, as well as American states, the Port Authority of New York, New Jersey, New York City, Los Angeles, and so on, Illinois. Credit default swaps. Credit default swaps have to go. And therefore, we applaud, we salute the step that was taken by the German government on Tuesday afternoon to ban naked credit default swaps. So you're not allowed to buy a credit default swap unless you own the underlying bond. And then you can say, yes, I'm hedging against risk. Well, that's not even accurate, but at least it's a step in the right direction. Better yet, ban all credit default swaps, but at least here's the step to ban a large class of them. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.